Have you ever seen a poison become an antidote for someone? London, 1890. In the grand bedroom of Pembroke Manor, doctors stood gathered around a woman's bed in astonishment. Lady Margaret Whitmore, 50 years old, sat in bed, thin, pale, but alive. And this was impossible, because 3 days earlier her husband had poisoned her. He had put enough arsenic in her food, a dose that could kill a horse, but Margaret had eaten that meal. And nothing had happened. The doctors couldn't understand it. The police couldn't understand what was happening. Her husband, Lord William Whitmore, certainly couldn't understand it. How could this be? Why hadn't the woman died? Margaret wasn't looking at them. She sat in bed, staring out the window. A strange expression was on her face. Sadness? Relief? Perhaps both. Then she turned her head. She looked at the police, and these words began to pour from her mouth. She explained why she hadn't died, because for 20 years, every single day she had been eating arsenic. Her body had become immune to poison. The poison couldn't kill her, because the poison was already a part of her. The room fell into silence. No one could believe it. Margaret continued. She told how it began, why she continued, and how, ironically, this habit that was slowly killing her had saved her life. Mini rehook. So what could have happened? The story Margaret told would shock everyone, because this wasn't just the story of one woman's addiction. This was the story of how Victorian society's beauty obsession nearly killed a woman and then unexpectedly saved her. But we needed to start from the beginning, the year 1870, when Margaret was beautiful, young, and desperately trying to preserve her beauty. Margaret Ashford had married at 18. It was 1858. Lord William Whitmore was 30 years old, wealthy, a handsome aristocrat. Margaret was beautiful, elegant, the perfect wife. The first years were happy. William loved her. They danced at balls. Everyone watched them with admiration. Margaret's beauty was legendary. Her porcelain white skin, her bright eyes, her graceful bearing. She was perfect. But gradually something changed. William began to grow cold. He showed less interest. He was more occupied with his work. Margaret didn't know why, but she was afraid. By 1870, Margaret was 30 years old, and what she saw in the mirror filled her with horror. Wrinkles, very small, but they were there, at the corners of her eyes, on her forehead. Her skin was no longer as smooth as before. There were blemishes, uneven colouring. She was aging. In Victorian society, beauty was everything for women, especially for aristocratic women. A woman who lost her beauty would lose her value. Her husband would lose interest. Society would forget her. Margaret panicked. William had already grown cold toward her. What would happen if she lost her beauty completely? Divorce was impossible, but William could find a mistress. He could ignore her. Her life could turn into hell. So Margaret began searching for a solution. In Victorian England, the beauty industry was a massive trade. Thousands of products were being sold, creams, powder, medicines, all promising miracles. They would erase wrinkles, brighten skin, restore youth, and many of them were poison. Margaret tried all the products, skin creams, whitening powders, face masks. Some worked, some didn't, but none were enough. Then one of her friends suggested something. Lady Beatrice was in her 40s, but her skin looked 20 years old. Margaret asked her secret. Beatrice smiled. Arsenic, she said. She was using arsenic. Margaret was shocked. Arsenic? Poison? Beatrice explained. Yes, arsenic was a poison. But in small doses it beautified the skin. It whitened it, smoothed it, made it younger. It was very popular in Europe, especially in Austria. Peasant girls in the mountains ate arsenic. Their skin became like crystal. Margaret couldn't believe it. But Beatrice's skin was proof. It really worked. Beatrice gave her a name, a pharmacy. They sold a special cream. It contained arsenic. It was said to be very effective. Margaret went there the next day. The pharmacy was a small, dark place. The pharmacist was an old man. Margaret asked for the cream. The man looked at her. "Are you sure?" he asked. "It contains arsenic. It could be dangerous." Margaret was sure. She bought the cream. She returned home. That night before bed she applied the cream to her face, a thin layer. Her skin burned a little. But Beatrice had said this was normal. The effect would appear over time. Margaret went to bed. She was excited, frightened too, but hopeful. When she looked in the mirror in the morning, she was very surprised by the face she saw. Her skin was brighter, whiter. The blemishes seemed to have faded slightly. It was working. Margaret smiled. Perhaps this was the solution. Perhaps she could bring back her beauty. Perhaps she could bring back William. She continued using the cream every night, and every morning her skin was a little better. 2 weeks later, William noticed. He looked at his wife. Something was different. Her skin was more beautiful, younger. He complimented Margaret. "You look beautiful," he said. Margaret filled with joy inside. It was working. Her plan was working. She continued using the cream. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. The effect continued. Her skin was truly becoming more beautiful. Wrinkles were diminishing. Colour was evening out. The porcelain whiteness was returning. But there was a problem. The cream ran out quickly, and its effect only lasted a few days. If she stopped using it, her skin returned to its old state. Margaret bought more cream. She began using it more frequently, twice a day, morning and night. And then she discovered something else. If she ate a little of the cream, the effect was more powerful. It came from within. Her skin glowed from inside. Margaret put a small amount under her tongue, swallowed it. At first her stomach felt nauseous, but then she got used to it, and the effect was incredible. Her skin had never been this beautiful. Her eyes were brighter, her cheeks pinker, her complexion like crystal. William began to notice her again. He showed interest. He praised her. Margaret was happy. Arsenic was working. And Margaret couldn't stop. Margaret didn't know that arsenic was, of course, not just a poison. It was also addictive. The body was getting used to arsenic. It wanted more. And stopping was becoming impossible. Margaret didn't think that what she'd started would nearly kill her, and ironically, years later, would save her life. But now she was just happy. She had regained her beauty, and she wanted more. In 1871, Margaret was no longer just using the cream. Every day she was eating small amounts of arsenic. She took it from the cream. Sometimes she bought pure arsenic powder from the pharmacy. She was gradually increasing the amount, at first a pinch, then a bit more, then more. Her body was adapting. In the first days there was nausea, headaches, trembling. But then these side effects decreased. The body was getting used to it, and the beauty effect continued. Margaret's skin was perfect. She was 32 years old but looked 20. Everyone admired her. At balls, women asked her how she did it. Margaret smiled. A special cream, she would say. She told no one her secret. William had completely changed. He had fallen in love with his wife again. He showed her attention, bought her gifts. Margaret was happy, but secretly she was becoming addicted. Addiction comes slowly. At first you think you can control it. Just a little. Just today. You can quit tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. Because the body adapts and demands more. Always more. Margaret didn't realise, but it was already too late. In 1872, Margaret's arsenic use had become part of her daily routine. She would wake up in the morning, take a small dose, mix it in her tea, swallow it, then start her day. In the afternoon, another dose. After dinner, another dose. 3 doses a day, every day. She never skipped, because if she did, her skin would return to its old state, and she was afraid of losing William again. The servants noticed nothing. Margaret was careful. She kept the arsenic in her own room, in a locked drawer. No one knew, but her body began to change. At first it was imperceptible, but gradually symptoms appeared. Her hands trembled occasionally, especially in the mornings, until she took the arsenic. Then the trembling stopped. Her stomach sometimes hurt, especially when she took too much. But if she took too little, her skin got worse. So she tried to find the balance. Her hair was falling out a little, thinly, hardly noticeable. But Margaret noticed. She worried. But she couldn't stop, because her skin was so beautiful, and this was more important than anything. In 1873, William surprised her. a jewelled necklace, diamonds, very expensive. Margaret was so happy. William still loved her, still valued her. The arsenic was working, but at night when she was alone, when she looked in the mirror, she sometimes had doubts. Was this right? Was it healthy? Her body was eating poison every day. Could this kill her? But then she saw her skin, perfect, flawless, and she decided she would continue. A little more, just a little more. This is how addiction works. You lie to yourself. Just a little more, then I'll quit. But you never quit, because you can't, and Margaret couldn't. The arsenic was no longer just for beauty. Her body needed it, physically. If she didn't take it, trembling would start, sweating, nausea, withdrawal. Margaret hadn't realized, but she was addicted, and with each passing day the addiction was deepening. In 1874, an incident occurred. One day Margaret forgot to take her arsenic. The morning was busy, guests had come, she was occupied. She skipped the arsenic. Until noon everything was fine, but then the trembling began. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She was sweating, her stomach was churning, her head was spinning. Margaret panicked. She ran to her room, opened the drawer, took the arsenic, immediately swallowed it. 10 minutes later, the symptoms passed. Her hands stopped. Her stomach calmed. The headache lessened. Margaret sat on the bed. She was breathing. She'd been frightened. What was happening? Why had this happened? And then she understood. Her body was dependent on arsenic. If she didn't take it, she experienced withdrawal. She physically needed it. Margaret was scared. This was dangerous. Perhaps she should stop. Perhaps she should quit. But then she looked in the mirror. Her skin, perfect, beautiful. William, he loved her. She couldn't stop herself. Margaret continued. She was more careful. She never skipped. Every day, every dose, on time. Because if she skipped, her body would rebel. In 1875, Margaret had been using arsenic for years now. 5 years had passed, and the dose was constantly increasing. Because the body had adapted. The same dose was no longer enough. More was needed. Margaret was now taking 4 doses a day, sometimes 5. The amount was approaching dangerous levels. If a normal person took this much, they would die. But Margaret wasn't dying, because her body had gotten used to it. Slowly over the years, she had developed immunity. In medical literature, there were people known as arsenic eaters, especially in the Austrian Alps. Peasants would start with small doses and gradually increase them, accustoming their bodies to the poison. Eventually, they could take doses that would kill a normal person. Margaret had unknowingly become an arsenic eater, and her body now tolerated arsenic, even needed it. But there was a price. Her health was slowly deteriorating. Margaret was successful. She had preserved her beauty. William still loved her. But it was built on a lie, built on poison, and Margaret didn't know that 15 years later, this poison would save her life, because her husband would try to kill her, and he would fail, because you couldn't kill Margaret with poison. Margaret was already poison. But that would happen much later. For now, Margaret was just addicted, and continuing. By 1876, Margaret had been married for 10 years. She was 36 years old, but her skin still looked 20. In aristocratic circles, Margaret's beauty was legendary. Women envied her. Men admired her. Many asked how she did it. Margaret would smile and move on. But the truth was dark. Every day, Margaret was pouring poison into her body, and her body to survive was adapting. Medically, something extraordinary was happening in Margaret's body, a phenomenon called mithridatism. It took its name from a historical king, Mithridates VI, king of Pontus. Afraid of being poisoned, he had taken small doses of poison every day. Years later, he had developed immunity. No poison could kill him. Margaret was unknowingly doing the same thing. Her body had learned to metabolize arsenic. The liver, the kidneys, were working, breaking down the poison, expelling it. But they couldn't expel it completely, because more was coming every day. Arsenic was accumulating in her tissues, in her hair, in her nails, in her bones. It had been accumulating slowly. But her body had learned to survive, to live with poison. The human body is an incredible machine. It adapts, it survives. But every adaptation has a price, and Margaret's price was being paid slowly. In 1878, changes occurred in Margaret's health. Small, but noticeable. Her hands now constantly trembled slightly. Not just during withdrawal, all the time, very slightly. Most people wouldn't notice, but Margaret noticed. Her hair had thinned, lost its shine. Margaret began using a wig. It was common in those days. No one suspected. Her stomach was sensitive. Sometimes she couldn't eat. Nausea. Cramps. But it would pass. It always passed. Because when she took the arsenic, everything would get better. Her nails had formed white lines, something called Mises lines, a classic sign of arsenic poisoning. But Margaret didn't know. No one knew. In appearance, Margaret was still beautiful. Her skin was perfect, but inside she was slowly rotting. In 1880, a doctor examined Margaret, a routine checkup. The doctor noticed strange findings. Her pulse was irregular. Reflexes were weak. There were signs of peripheral neuropathy. The doctor asked, "Are you using anything? Medicine? Cream?" Margaret lied. "No, nothing." The doctor was suspicious, but there was no proof. He advised Margaret to rest, to eat healthily. Margaret agreed, but she didn't quit the arsenic because she couldn't quit. She was addicted, and her skin was still beautiful. This was worth everything. Addiction blinds you. You can't see the price. You only see the reward. For Margaret, the reward was beauty. The price was her life, but she hadn't understood yet. It would take another 10 years for her to understand, and by then it would be too late. In 1882, William's behaviour changed again. He grew cold, distant. Margaret worried. What was happening? Her beauty was still perfect. Why was William losing interest? Margaret worked harder. She took more arsenic. Her skin glowed even more. But she couldn't win back William's attention, because the problem wasn't beauty. William was interested in another woman, a young woman, 25 years old, Lord Ashford's daughter, beautiful, cheerful, young. Margaret didn't know this, but she felt it. Her husband was drifting away, and she could do nothing. In 1883, William took a mistress, Lady Rosalind. It wasn't a secret. Everyone in aristocratic circles knew. It was a scandal. But William didn't care. Margaret's heart broke. All her effort had been for nothing. Her beauty, the arsenic, everything. It hadn't been enough. But still she didn't stop, because if she quit the arsenic, her beauty would go too, and then she would have no chance at all. So she continued. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, every day, without ever stopping. By 1885, Margaret was 45 years old. She had been using arsenic for 15 years. Her body had now completely adapted. She could tolerate incredible amounts of arsenic. One day, Margaret accidentally took much more than normal. 2 times the dose, 3 times. She waited in panic. Would she die? Nothing happened. A bit of nausea. But it passed. She survived. Margaret was amazed. Was this possible? That much poison, and nothing happened? Her body was now immune. It had developed immunity to poison. From a medical perspective, it was a miracle. But Margaret didn't know. She only knew that she was alive, and arsenic could no longer kill her. This knowledge would save her life 5 years later. Margaret didn't know that her husband was making a plan. William wanted to be rid of Margaret. Divorce was impossible. It would be a scandal. But death would solve everything. And William had discovered that Margaret used arsenic. He had misunderstood. He thought Margaret was trying to kill herself. This had given him an idea. A bad idea. He would poison Margaret. Use arsenic. Everyone would think it was suicide, the perfect murder. But William didn't know. You couldn't kill Margaret with arsenic, because Margaret's body was now poison itself. In 1885, William had completely grown cold toward Margaret. He was openly seen with his mistress Rosalind. It was a scandal, but he didn't care. Margaret had shut herself away at home. She no longer went to balls. She had withdrawn from social life. She was 45 years old. She still looked beautiful. But inside she was broken. William wanted a different life. A life without Margaret. He wanted to marry Rosalind. But how? Divorce was impossible. In aristocratic circles it would be a scandal. His family would reject him, his social position would end, but death was possible. If Margaret died, William would be a widower. He would mourn, wait a few years, then marry Rosalind. Perfect. William began thinking about killing his wife. Thinking about murder is one thing, planning murder is another. William was doing the latter, carefully, calculatedly, coldly. And Margaret had a habit. William didn't know what it was, but he knew she was using something. Very soon he would discover, and this discovery would give him the perfect plan. In 1886, one day William entered Margaret's room. Margaret wasn't there. She'd gone shopping. William looked around. He was searching for his wife's secrets. Perhaps a letter, perhaps a confession, perhaps something he could use. He opened drawers, clothes, jewellery. Nothing was interesting. Then he found a locked drawer, small, inconspicuous. William broke the lock. Inside were bottles, small glass bottles. They had labels. Arsenicum album. Arsenic. William froze. Arsenic. Why was Margaret keeping arsenic? His first thought was terrible. Was Margaret planning to kill herself? Was she going to commit suicide? But then he saw other things. Creams, powder, beauty products, all contained arsenic. William understood. Margaret was using arsenic. For beauty, for cosmetic purposes, but there was so much. Bottles, dozens of bottles. How much was Margaret using? William picked up a bottle, looked at its label. The concentration was high, dangerous. If enough was taken, it would kill. And at that moment, an idea was born. William smiled. A dark, cold smile. Margaret was already using arsenic. If she was killed, everyone would think it was an accident, or suicide. No one would suspect William. The perfect murder, the perfect plan. William put the bottle back, closed the drawer. He began making his plan. William didn't know that Margaret wasn't just using arsenic. For 15 years she had been eating arsenic every day. Her body was immune. William thought his perfect plan was perfect, but actually it was impossible. You couldn't kill Margaret with arsenic, because Margaret's body was now poison itself. But William would learn this very soon, and he would be shocked. Throughout 1887, William prepared his plan. He wasn't rushing. He had to be careful. It had to be flawless. He bought arsenic from pharmacies, using different names from different pharmacies to avoid leaving a trail. He researched dosage. How much would kill? How fast would it work? How should it be administered? He read books, medical articles, poisoning cases. He learned everything. By 1888, he was ready. The plan was complete. He just needed to wait for the right moment. In February, the opportunity came. Margaret had fallen ill. The flu. She was resting in bed. She was weak, defenceless. William made his move. One evening he brought Margaret soup. Hot, delicious soup. Margaret was surprised that her husband brought it. William rarely showed interest, but she was happy. Perhaps William's heart had softened. Perhaps there was still hope. Margaret didn't know there was arsenic in the soup. A lot of arsenic. Enough to kill a normal person. William held out the soup bowl. Margaret smiled, thanked him. She picked up her spoon, began drinking the soup. William watched. He appeared calm, but inside he was excited. In a few hours Margaret would be dead, and he would be free. Margaret finished the soup, thanked him. William nodded, left the room. Now he just had to wait. William went to his library, sat down, pretended to read a book, but his mind was on Margaret. How long would it take? 1 hour? 2 hours? 1 hour passed. Nothing happened. 2 hours passed. Servants went up and down. Normal. No complaints from Margaret. 3 hours passed. William began to worry. Why wasn't anything happening? 4 hours passed. William couldn't stand it. He went upstairs, went to Margaret's room, opened the door slightly. Margaret was sitting in bed, reading a book, calm, healthy, alive. William froze. This was impossible. That much arsenic. She should be dead. At least she should be sick. But Margaret was fine. Nothing had happened. William closed the door, went back. His mind was confused. How could this be? Perhaps the dose wasn't enough. Perhaps more was needed. William decided he would try again. More arsenic. This time it would work, but it wouldn't work. Because Margaret's body had been eating arsenic every day for 15 years. It was immune, resistant. No dose could kill her. William didn't know this, but very soon he would be shocked. William couldn't understand. How was she alive? That much poison, and nothing happened. He would try again. Once more, twice more, 3 times more. But the result would always be the same. Margaret would survive. And finally Margaret would notice. Her husband was trying to kill her, and she would take action. Ironic justice was approaching. William was trying to kill his wife with poison, but his wife couldn't be killed with poison, because his wife was already poison. In March 1888, William made his second attempt. This time he used more arsenic. 2 times the first, 3 times. If this didn't work, nothing would. Again it was dinner. William had prepared a special drink for Margaret. Wine. Sweet, red wine. There was arsenic in it. A lot of arsenic. Margaret drank the wine. The taste was a bit strange, but she didn't complain. Perhaps the wine had aged. William waited again. This time he was more hopeful. This much arsenic would definitely work. But again nothing happened. Margaret was fine. There were no symptoms, no poisoning, no vomiting, no pain, nothing. William was going mad. How was this possible? He tried twice, failed twice. Perhaps the arsenic had gone bad. Perhaps it had become ineffective. There could be no other explanation. William bought new arsenic, fresh, powerful, deadly. In June, the 3rd attempt. This time he put it in Margaret's tea. Morning tea. The tea she drank every day. The amount of arsenic was absurd. It would kill a normal person immediately, maybe even 2 people. Margaret drank the tea, finished it, started her day. Nothing happened. William was now panicking. This was impossible. He tried 3 times, failed 3 times. How? Perhaps Margaret was noticing. Perhaps she was refusing to eat or drink. But no, she was eating, drinking, everything. William thought, perhaps Margaret was already using poison, using an antidote, protecting herself. But this was illogical. How could she know? William didn't know, but Margaret was really starting to notice. In the first 2 attempts, she hadn't felt anything. But in the 3rd, her husband's behaviour was strange. He was too attentive, too kind. And then he was watching her from behind, waiting. Margaret began to suspect. Was William doing something? Was he trying to kill her? But how? And why wasn't she dying? Margaret thought about her own arsenic habit. 15 years. Every day. Was her body immune? Was it possible? In 1889, William made his 4th and 5th attempts. The 4th, in Margaret's dinner, large dose. The 5th, in Margaret's drinking water, even larger dose. Both failed. Margaret survived each time, showed no symptoms. William was now hopeless. What would he do? Should he try another method? Knife? Rope? But these would be obvious. It would be clear it was murder. Arsenic was perfect. It could look like suicide, but it wasn't working. William was desperate, and Margaret was now certain. Her husband was trying to kill her. 5 attempts, perhaps more. She had survived all of them, because her body was immune. She had eaten arsenic for years. It could no longer kill her. It was ironic. The habit she had started for beauty obsession was now saving her life. Margaret decided she had to take action. She had to go to the police. She had to report William. But she needed proof. Suspicion alone wasn't enough. Margaret planned, waited, watched. In January 1890, Margaret caught the evidence. William was putting arsenic in Margaret's food again, but this time Margaret was watching, secretly, through the crack in the door. William entered the kitchen. The servants weren't there. He poured something into the food. White powder. From a bottle. An arsenic bottle. Margaret saw it. It was definite proof. William left the kitchen. Margaret quickly entered. Took the bottle. Hid it. Evidence. At dinner, Margaret ate the food. William watched, waited again, was disappointed again. But this was the last attempt, because Margaret was now going to take action. The next day, Margaret went to the police. Margaret entered the police station. She was calm, determined. She told the police everything, that her husband was trying to kill her, 5 times, 6 times, perhaps more, that he was using arsenic. She showed them the bottle as evidence. The police were shocked. This was a serious accusation, but there was evidence, and Margaret was alive, healthy. The police asked, "How did you survive? This much poison?" Margaret took a deep breath. It was time to confess. She told them she had been eating arsenic every day for 15 years, that she had started for beauty, that she was addicted, that her body had become immune. The police couldn't believe it. But Margaret was serious. They called a doctor. They examined Margaret, did a blood test. The result was shocking. Margaret's body had high levels of arsenic, chronic exposure, but her body had adapted. She had survived. It was a medical miracle. The police arrested William, attempted murder. The evidence was clear: the bottle, Margaret's statement, the doctor's report. William was brought to trial. He was found guilty, 15 years in prison. Ironic justice had come. William had tried to kill his wife with poison, but his wife couldn't be killed with poison, because her bad habit had saved her. In the autumn of 1890, the trial had ended. William was guilty. He had received a prison sentence. Margaret was free, but she wasn't liberated, because her body was still poisoned. Doctors warned she had to quit the arsenic immediately, otherwise chronic poisoning would kill her. Margaret knew, but quitting would be difficult. She had been addicted for 20 years. Her body needed it, but she tried. For the first time seriously, she tried to reduce the arsenic. The first days were hell: withdrawal, trembling, vomiting, pain. Her body was rebelling. It wanted arsenic. Margaret couldn't bear it. She took it again. A small dose, just to get through the symptoms, but the small dose became a large dose. She returned to the old routine. Doctors warned again. But Margaret couldn't quit. Addiction is such a thing that even if you know it will kill you, you can't quit. The body demands, the mind deceives. Just today, I'll quit tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. For Margaret, tomorrow didn't come. In 1891, Margaret's health began to deteriorate. 21 years of arsenic use was finally showing its effect. Her hands trembled constantly. She could no longer control them. Eating was difficult. Writing was difficult. Her feet were numb. Peripheral neuropathy. The nerves were damaged. Walking was painful. Her skin, ironically, her skin was no longer beautiful. Yellowish, dry, blotchy. The arsenic had lost its effect. When Margaret looked in the mirror, she saw someone she didn't recognize. She was 51 years old but looked 70. All those years, all that effort, to preserve beauty, and in the end she lost everything. In 1892, Margaret became very ill. Liver failure, kidney damage. The arsenic had accumulated in her tissues, slowly killing her organs. The doctors could do nothing. It was too late. The damage was irreversible. Margaret was confined to bed at Pembroke Manor, alone. William was in prison. She had no children, no friends. There were only servants and doctors. They were waiting for Margaret to die. The years 1893-1894 passed. Margaret survived. Difficultly, painfully, but alive. Her body was still resilient. Despite 20 years of poison, it was still fighting, but it was losing the fight. In February 1895, Margaret turned 55. But these were the last days of her life. Doctors visited her. Her condition was bad. Perhaps a week, perhaps less. Margaret accepted. She was ready. Living was now torture. But before dying, she wanted to do something. She wanted to tell her story. She called a journalist, a young woman, Sarah Williams, from the Times newspaper. Sarah came, sat beside Margaret's bed, listened. Margaret told everything: her beauty obsession, her arsenic habit, her addiction, her husband's murder attempts, her ironic survival, and finally, the heavy price. Sarah took notes, recorded everything. Margaret's story would appear in the newspaper. The world would learn. Margaret felt relieved. Her story wouldn't be lost. Perhaps it would be a lesson to other women. The price of beauty obsession was very heavy. Sometimes your life. In March, Margaret died, peacefully, because finally the burden was lifted. A week after Margaret's death, the Times newspaper published the story. The headline was shocking. the arsenic eater, lady who survived murder because of deadly habit. The story told everything: Margaret's beauty obsession, 20 years of arsenic use, how her body became immune, her husband's murder attempts, her ironic survival, and finally her tragic death. London was shocked. Aristocratic circles were horrified. Margaret had been eating arsenic for 20 years, and no one knew. But even more shocking, she wasn't alone. After the newspaper was published, other women came forward, quietly, shamefully. They were also using arsenic for beauty. They were also addicted. The Victorian beauty industry was exposed. Arsenic creams, powder, pills, all were poison, all were being sold, legally. The public was outraged. The government took action. In the autumn of 1895, new laws were passed. Cosmetics containing arsenic were banned. Their sale became a crime. Margaret's story led to change. Her death was not in vain. William had gone to prison. He had a 15-year sentence. In 1897, he died in prison. Pneumonia. He was 57 years old. No one mourned. His mistress Rosalind married another man. William was forgotten. Margaret's grave was in Highgate Cemetery, a simple headstone. Lady Margaret Whitmore, 1840 to 1895, lost in pursuit of beauty, a bitter story. As the years passed, Margaret's story became legend. The arsenic eater, the woman who ate poison and became unkillable by poison. It was written in medical books. The most extreme example of mithridatism, the adaptive power of the human body, but also the destructive power of addiction. In 1900, a doctor studied Margaret's story, the arsenic levels in her body, the organ damage, how she survived for 20 years. The conclusion was astonishing. Margaret's body had the highest known arsenic tolerance. She was taking doses that could kill a normal person 10 times over, every day, for 20 years. A medical miracle, but a tragic miracle, because in the end the poison won. It always wins. Margaret had dedicated her life to beauty, to conforming to Victorian society standards, to pleasing her husband, to being socially accepted, and for this she poisoned herself, slowly, every day, 20 years. The ironic thing was, this poison saved her once, when her husband tried to kill her. But in the end, it killed her anyway. Beauty obsession nearly killed Margaret, then saved her, then killed her again. The cycle was complete, tragic, ironic, unforgettable. Lady Margaret Whitmore's story ends here. For 20 years she ate arsenic. She made her body immune to poison. When her husband tried to kill her, she survived, because poison could no longer kill her. But in the end, the poison won, because poison always wins. Victorian England imposed impossible standards on women. Be beautiful, look young, be perfect. And for this, women harmed themselves, sometimes fatally. Margaret's story is a warning. The price of beauty obsession can be very heavy, sometimes your life. Subscribe to Victorian Secrets Untold, because more forgotten stories, more tragic truths, and more deathbed confessions await you. Some secrets are more deadly than poison.